I think you can learn pretty quickly that preseason rankings are preseason rankings. You don't actually know everything that's going to happen and everything about every team, right? Florida State's a really good example of that, going 0-2 after being preseason ranked 10. So in terms of Georgia, what can we learn over their beatdown over the preseason ranked number 14 Clemson, who is obviously going to drop in the rankings at least a little bit, and a team that I think will be ranked in the end, but sometimes week one, you end up with hot takes, you end up with way too early takes, but I do think that we can learn about teams. So what did we learn from Georgia over the weekend, over the first weekend of college football? What are some things that we learned about Georgia? I got a few things jotted down that's mostly about Georgia, and I think we can make some other conclusions based off of watching some other teams. So I'm wasting no more time. But one thing, right? And maybe this is something that we knew about Georgia a little bit, but you didn't know if they were going to do it this season. Immediately off the bat, right in a big game to open up the first weekend. The thing we learned is that Georgia is not afraid to rotate key positions in big games. They were doing it early and often, and it was happening a lot. And obviously, there were different success levels with different units. But one of the groups that I noticed, and there's three groups that I want to talk about, the offensive line. They rotated that a lot. I mean, they were just taking turns on different drives. The starting offensive line from left to right, so left tackle to left guard, center, right guard to right tackle, right? The starting line was on the left, Ernest Green, and then Dylan Fairchild at left guard, Jared Wilson at center, Tate Ratledge, the All-American, at right guard, and then Xavier Truss at right tackle. But they experienced with different groups. Micah Morris on different drives came in for Dylan Fairchild at left guard. Monroe Freeling had a different drive, right? He's kind of the right tackle too. If you had to give him one spot, I think he's Xavier Truss's backup. Well, he came in there for Xavier Truss at right tackle. But there were other drives where he was slated at left tackle for Ernest Green, so they rotated him there, right? You can move Tate Ratledge from left guard to right guard. They were using all sorts of different units, and yes, all right, you can point out a couple players where Monroe Freeling didn't. I think he allowed a sack, right? I think he may have been the one that allowed the sack that number 11. I'm blanking on number 11's name, but very good young defensive end, defensive lineman for Clemson. And that's the other thing about it, right? This was a Clemson team that had a pretty good defense. In Georgia, I think they have a good defense. They definitely have a lot of really good players, and I think as the year goes on, they will have good defensive days against ACC teams as the years go on, as the season goes on. But they weren't afraid to rotate off the bat immediately, right? At defensive back, Ja'Cory Thomas was in there first to start, and then a few plays in, they rotate in freshman KJ Bolden, and he starts getting action. He ended up getting most of the action there. But at DB, right, Daniel Harris, a backup corner, right? He's probably the third corner on this team, right? He subbed in for Julian Humphrey a little bit. They were rotating him in early. They rotated in after KJ Bolden was in there. It was more about rotating Ja'Cory Thomas in there every once in a while. He ends up with a big pass breakup in the second half. Dan Jackson was out there for the most part. They rotated where Malachi Starks was on defense. They had him at safety. They had him at star. And with different personnel, they were able to rotate in different guys. You saw in garbage time, it's not as much rotating right when Ellis Robinson and some other freshmen like Justin Williams came in. Those guys were kind of coming in garbage time when the game was already out of hand. But in terms of significant snaps, right, they were trying to figure out their best group. And maybe part of that is week one, trying to figure out your best group. But this is a big game against a Clemson team that, look, over here on Dawg Post, we told you we thought it was going to be a blowout, but it doesn't mean you don't take an opponent like that seriously on a neutral field. Even if it is in Atlanta, it is still a neutral field, and there's more Clemson fans at that game than there would be at Sanford Stadium. And then wide receivers, right? They rotated wide receivers. I want to talk about that. That's kind of my next point, so I'm going to get to that in depth a little bit more. But the linebackers too, right? You saw Raylan Wilson and Smile London and C.J. Allen and Jalen Walker. Those guys kind of taking turns at different spots. And we do know that those are guys taking turns with the green dot on the back of the helmet. What does the green dot mean? It means they are the ones that can speak to the coaches through the microphone until there is 15 seconds left on the play clock. So if you're using the whole play clock, 40 seconds down, you get about 25 seconds there in between plays for the coach to communicate with that linebacker in the huddle, right? Georgia is rotating that at linebacker. And you saw all three of them, C.J. Allen, Raylan Wilson, Small London, make some plays. So not afraid to rotate and get their guys in there. And probably in Georgia's terms, all of those guys are starters. So I think what we learned is they're not afraid to get their depth in there, right? Ryan Kelly from Dawg Post here. Talked about that a little bit longer than I wanted to. Make sure you're rotating your head. This was lame transition, but you're rotating and you're making sure you're swiveling and you're on your feet. The best way to do that as a Georgia fan is to be signed up for the Dawg Post newsletter, right? We make it a little bit easier for you. You don't have to be as alert because we're going to be the ones alerting you everything that's going on in your mailbox every single day. So make sure you are checking that out with the link down below, right? So like I was saying a minute ago, my first point kind of bleeds into my second point. Something I think that we learned about Georgia was depth at wide receiver, right? It was the suspicion that we had all offseason that Georgia, this wide receiver room, might be better than last year's. Why? Not because they have a Brock Bowers level player, and they might have a Lab McConkey level player. I'm not 100% sure about that yet. Lab McConkey, right, it looks like he's going to be wide receiver one for the Chargers, so that's a pretty big deal, but it's the depth is different. They're deeper. They have more good wide receivers than they've had in the past, and I think that was on display instantly this year, right? Who was the first touchdown scorer? It was transfer Colby Young, who was not starting in the game. Who are their starters? Dillon Bell, Dominic Lovett, and Arian Smith. All right, I'm a big Dillon Bell guy. I think Dillon Bell got his plays in there. One of them was called back, but it was still a good play by him. But I think that he showed his versatility as a receiver, catching the ball all over the field, breaking away from tackles. Dominic Lovett, he didn't get the ball that much in this game. Right, he got it a couple times. He shows flashes. This is the guy that's projected to be their wide receiver one, right? A guy that dominated in spring ball, dominated at G-Day, and he gets the ball twice. So he has more targets than that. It was not a good target to catch ratio. It wasn't a great percentage there, but he wasn't the dominating receiver, and he wasn't even close to it. He was way down the line. Because another transfer, London Humphreys, who I got a quote about him in a second. He comes in and he gets a touchdown. He gets a huge third down catch across the middle of the field. And you've got guys like Anthony Evans and Michael Jackson III and some younger players that didn't play significant snaps, right? They're only getting in there at garbage time. Guys that they feel comfortable letting out there on the field, they just didn't get time in a game like this, right? So instantly you see Carson Beck got it to like 9 different receivers, 9 different pass catchers when you add in the tight ends and you add in the running backs. Carson Beck was spreading it around, so they have depth at that receiver position. This is what Kirby said about London Humphreys, reading a quote. It's great he does a good job. He's probably more in relief for Arian Smith, and he did a good job. He's got SEC experience. I think that's what, the portal provides you to get a guy that's been successful and played well in our conference. He's done that. He's proven himself as a guy that can make plays, and he was ready when his number was called. We talk about it all the time. Your opportunity's coming. Are you going to seize the moment when the moment jumps out in front of you? He did that. He certainly did that. I think Humphreys proved that he's going to be a contributor on this team. And it's interesting. He's in reserve for Arian Smith. I think Colby Young's kind of in reserve for Dillon Bell. Well, what happens? Dillon Bell ends up cramping, right? He has to come out of the game. That leads to more playing time for other guys. London Humphreys took advantage of that opportunity. And talking about Arian Smith, he looked really good. He looked like more than just a deep threat, which is all he's been, right? And a guy that struggled to catch the ball. Well, I saw a player that was more advanced in his route running, that was more advanced in his after-the-catch abilities, and just had more advanced hands. If Arian Smith is a little bit better, this is a weapon for Georgia that they haven't really had, which is just a speedster that can kind of do everything. If Arian Smith can be closer to that, the depth is already better. And then another thing, and this one is maybe this is way too early to say. I feel really strong about these first 2 points I've talked about, the depth and the rotating. But this one might be your way too early. So my third thing that I think that we can learn from the Clemson game from Georgia. The running back room is already in better hands than it was in 2023. And people are going to get on me about that a little bit maybe. Dejan Edwards and Kendall Milton, championship contributors and a good running back duo. But this running back room, I think, already proved to be in better hands in one game. Why? Trevor Etienne wasn't out there. Roderick Robinson wasn't out there. Those were the projected RB1 and RB2 of this team. What happened? Frazier, true freshman, looks really good. He has 11 carries for 83 yards. Cash Jones, a guy who's been around the program for a couple years now, a former walk-on who has made plays. He had the knockout blow against Clemson. He had an impressive touchdown, the most impressive touchdown of the day. Branson Robinson struggled, right? And he didn't look that great. I think that will come in time for him as he is a year removed, just over a year removed from a pretty major knee injury, and he's out there making the start. So I think he's a guy that'll still be in the rotation as a power back. They're still missing Trevor Etienne, projected to be the number one back, and their projected number one power back, Roderick Robinson, who apparently had a pretty good spring. That was the word on the street. So I think that them running for 169 yards, over 6 yards per carry, against a pretty good Clemson defensive line and really good Clemson linebackers, without the guys that are supposed to be their top two guys, and maybe Nate Frazier turns into one of the top two guys. I certainly think that's possible, but I think it kind of shows against a good team they were ready, and this running back room's in better shape than it was a year ago, where they struggled with injuries, and it was a problem. You had Dylan Bell out there as a running back. You can't tell me it's not already a little bit deeper if that's the result on Saturday. My biggest takeaways, things I think we can learn from the Dogs. Thanks for watching.